On the third day, the chief met with his officers. He called the alchemist to the meeting and said, "Let's go see the boy who turns himself into the wind." "Let's," the alchemist answered. The boy took them to the cliff where he had been on the previous day. He told them all to be seated. "It's going to take a while," the boy said. "We're in no hurry," the chief answered. "We're men of the desert." The boy looked out at the horizon. There were mountains in the distance, and there were dunes, rocks, and plants that insisted on living where survival seemed impossible. There was the desert that he had wandered for so many months. Despite all that time, he only knew a small part of it. Within that small part, he had found an Englishman, caravans, tribal wars, an oasis with 50,000 palm trees and 300 wells. "What do you want here today?" the desert asked him. "You didn't spend enough time looking at me yesterday?" Oh gosh, this is so young. "Somewhere you're holding the person I love," the boy said. "So when I look out over your sands, I'm also looking at her. I want to return to her, and I need your help so that I can turn myself into the wind." "What is love?" the desert asked. "Love is the falcon's flight over your sands, because for him you are a green field from which he always returns with game. He knows your rocks, your dunes, your mountains, and you are generous to him. The falcon's beak carries bits of me, myself," the desert said. "For years I care for his game, feeding it with little water that I have, and then I show him where the game is. And one day, as I enjoy the fact that his game thrives on my surface, the falcon dives out of the sky and takes away what I've created." "But that's why you've created the game in the first place," the boy answered, "to nourish the falcon. And the falcon then nourishes man. And eventually man will nourish your sands, where the game will once again flourish. That's how the world goes." "So is that what love is?" "Yes, that's what love is. That's what makes the game becomes the falcon becomes man, and man in his turn the desert. That's what turns lead into gold, and makes the gold return to earth." "I don't understand what you're talking about," the desert said. "But you can at least understand that somewhere in your sands there is a woman waiting for me, and that's why I have to turn myself into the wind." The desert didn't answer him for a few moments. Then it told him, "I'll give you my sands to help the wind blow, but alone I can't do anything. You have to ask for help from the wind." A breeze began to blow. The tribesmen watched the boy from a distance, talking among themselves in a language the boy couldn't understand. The alchemist smiled. The wind approached the boy and touched his face. It knew of the boy's talk with the desert, because the winds know everything. They blow across the world without a birthplace and with no place to die. "Help me," the boy said. "One day you carried the voice of my loved one to me." "Who taught you to speak the language of the desert and the wind?" "My heart," the boy answered. "The wind has many names. In that part of the world, it was called Sirocco," and we can look that up, that might not be right, "because it brought moisture from the oceans to the east. In the distant land the boy came from, they called it Levante, because it believed that it brought the sand of the desert and streams of the Moorish wars. Perhaps in the places beyond the pastures where his sheep lived, men thought that the wind came from Andalusia, but actually the wind came from no place at all, nor did it go any place. That's why it was stronger than the desert. Someone might one day plant trees in the desert and even raise sheep there, but never would they harness the wind. You can't be the wind said. We're two different things. That's not true, the boy said. I learned the alchemist secrets in my travels. I have inside me the winds, the deserts, the oceans, the stars, and everything created in the universe. We are all made by the same hand. We all have the same soul. I want to be like you, able to reach every corner of the world, across the seas, blow away the sands that cover my treasure, and carry the voice of the woman I love. I heard what you were talking about the other day with the alchemist, the wind said. He said that everything has its own destiny, but people can't turn themselves into the wind. Just teach me to be the wind for a few moments, the boy said, so you and I can talk about the limitless possibilities of people in the winds. The wind's curiosity was aroused, something that had never happened before. It wanted to talk about those things, but it didn't know how to turn a man into the wind. Look how many things the wind already knew how to do. It created deserts, sank ships, felled entire forests, and blew through cities filled with music and strange noises. It felt it had no limits, yet there was a voice saying that there were other things the wind should be able to do. This is what we call love, the boy said, seeing the wind was close to granting what he requested. When you are loved, you can do anything in creation. When you are loved, there is no need at all to understand what's happening because everything happens within you. And even men can turn themselves into the wind, as long as the wind helps, of course. The wind was a proud being, and it was becoming irritated with what the boy was saying. It commenced to blow harder, raising the desert sands, but it finally had to recognize that even making its way around the world, it didn't know how to turn man into the wind, and it knew nothing about love. In my travels around the world, I've often seen people speaking of love and looking towards the heaven, the wind said, furious at having to acknowledge its own limitations. Maybe it's better to ask heaven. Well, then will you help me do that, the boy said. Fill this place with a sandstorm so strong that it blots out the sun and I can look to heaven without blinding myself. So the wind blew with all its strength, and the sky was filled with sand, and the sun was turned into a golden disk. At the camp it was difficult to see anything. The men of the desert were already familiar with that wind. They called it the simum, and it was worse than a storm at sea. Their horses cried out, and all their weapons were filled with sand. On the heights, one of the commanders turned to the chief and said, "Maybe we'd better end this." They could barely see the boy. Their faces were covered with blue cloths, and their eyes showed fear. "Let's stop this," another commander said. "I want to see the greatness of Allah," the chief said with respect. "I want to see how a man turns himself into the wind." But he made a mental note of the names of the two men who had expressed their fear. As soon as the wind stopped, he was going to remove them from their commands. Because true men of the desert are not afraid. Okay, that's not true, and that's a very patriarchal thing to say. Fear is obviously a very, very normal reaction in scary situations. So, even though it's beautiful writing, real men, real women, that's gender, no, we'll get into that later. Okay, and I'm going to have to actually pause because there's more to read and this one's getting overloaded. So, patriarchy, no. I love you.